welcome back to Cruising as Crew. My name is Lucy and today we're going to be talking about the safety aspect of working on board a cruise ship. I know that there's a lot of you who are joining contracts very soon, or you've already just started your contract. And the whole safety aspect of your job on board a cruise ship can be very, very confusing. So today I just wanted to take the time to break it all down so that when you go on board, you're a little bit more clued up on what you actually have to do as a crew member. Now, when you work on a cruise ship, you basically have two jobs. You're going to have the job that you are hired to do and then your emergency role. So for example, I am a shop assistant and my emergency role is a stairway marshal. You might be a chef and you might be an assembly station leader. So you will have two jobs. The thing is about this though is I find many crew members don't actually find out about their second job until they get on board a cruise ship, and then they're like, oh, so I not only have to do this job, I also have to do this one. There is a hell of a lot of stuff to learn when it comes to your safety role. Hopefully by watching this video, everything will be a little bit more clear and then you can relax a bit more when you get on board and it's not going to be so much of a whirlwind. So one of the first things you're going to be given when you get on board is a safety card. This is basically a little credit card that you are going to have with you at all times. This credit card will have your safety number on it. It should have a little map of the ship. It should also have your responsibilities in the case of an emergency. You need to know this number off by heart. The reason is, in a drill, they're going to do a register to make sure that everyone has attended the drill, and also in an emergency, they're going to do a register to make sure that you're there and not stuck in a fire. But the register is not going to be done with names, it's going to be done with emergency numbers. So if you're stood there like a lemon because you don't know what your number is, you're going to be reported as missing, and that's not going to be good. So you need to make sure you know your number. And the reason that the register is done with emergency numbers rather than names, on cruise ships there are obviously many nationalities on board, and that means a lot of names, some of which are very difficult to pronounce for, you know, many different nationalities. So for clarity reasons, it's just easier to use numbers. So it's your first day on board, you've been issued an emergency card with an emergency number, and you will take part in a passenger drill before the ship sets sail. It's legal, it has to happen. So your manager will take you to your muster station and basically say, that's where you stand. Now, because it is a passenger drill, there's going to be a lot going on, and most likely there isn't going to be time for your manager or the muster station leader to explain exactly what's going on. Yes, this is less than ideal, but I'm just being brutally honest with you, it's just how it is. Your first crew drill, my biggest advice would be to ask as many questions as possible. Like, why am I here? What is my job? Do I just stand here, or am I meant to advise passengers? Because if you're new on board, no one is going to expect you to actually know what's going on. No one knows what's going on when they first get on board. But it's really important that you ask the questions, because cruise ships are huge. So the only people who are going to be aware that you are brand new on board are the people that you are working with in your department. But in these muster stations, there's a mix of all departments. So your muster station leader might be a chef, and the person who stood next to you might be a dancer, but you're a shop staff. So they don't actually know that you're brand new on board. So they're not going to come up to you and ask you if you know what you're doing, because no one wants to be rude. So it is your responsibility to ask if you don't know what's going on. And I urge you to do this at the beginning of your contract, because it's not embarrassing to ask what's going on when you've got on 2 days ago. It is embarrassing to ask what's going on when you've been on board for 3 months because you've never mustered up the courage to ask the questions. Just get it out the way. Trust me, it's better. Okay, so you figured out what you are doing in drill. You know, like, what your role is in an emergency. But now, I mean, what do all these alarms mean? The alarms are the most confusing thing. For me, they were anyway, and I know for a lot of people, they're like, do we go now? What do we do on this one? So we're going to go through the very beginning of an emergency to the very end of an emergency, of like worst case scenario. Let's say we're dealing with a fire. Someone is going to find a fire and they're going to call the bridge to be like, I found a fire and I can't put it out on my own. That person is then going to evacuate the area and blah blah blah. If you are not in the area of the fire and you're just going about your day and you have no idea this is going on, the first thing that you are going to hear over the tannoy is initial response, initial response, initial response. Now that is basically the captain or one of the officers telling the initial response team that they need to go and suss the situation out. Is this fire huge? Can you put it out? What's going on? Now, the initial response team is usually a team of quite senior crew members. So if it's your first contract, do not worry, you are not going to be the person that goes to the forefront of an emergency. Now, best case scenario, the initial response team go to where the emergency has been reported and they call the captain and be like, nah, it's nothing, there's nothing going on, no worries. However, if it is something, they're then going to call the captain and be like, yes, there's a fire, you need to send the fire team. Or, yes, there's been a collision, there's a huge hole in the ship, you need to shut the watertight doors, or whatever it is. So that is the next step in the emergency process. Now, in an ideal situation, you want the fire team to put out the fire right there and then, so there's no more announcements on the tannoy. So you, as a crew member who has no idea at this point, continue to have no idea that anything went on. And obviously, as a passenger on board, there's been no announcements other than initial response, so you also don't have any idea. Now, if that doesn't happen and the fire cannot be put out by that fire team because it's too big, the next alarm you will hear is one long blast on the ship's whistle. This is a signal for all crew members to stop what they're doing and go to their muster stations. Let's say this was in the middle of the sea day, so I was in the shop talking to a customer and this one long signal went off. I would kindly ask the customer to leave the shop. The crew would then proceed to their cabins to pick up their life jackets and warm clothing, and then you would go to your muster station and wait there. The next step would be a message from the captain or an officer to ask the passengers to go to their cabin and retrieve their life jacket, any medication and warm clothing. And then once passengers had done that, you would then hear the 7 short and 1 long. Now, a lot of people think the 7 short 1 long is a sign to abandon ship. No. This is just the signal letting the passengers know that they now need to go to their muster station. So as a stairway marshal, this is where you would be guiding people down the stairs and guiding them to their muster station. Or if you're in a muster station, you would be directing people in, asking them to take a seat. You would be doing whatever job you have been assigned. Now, this is the kicker. You could be in that position for 10 minutes or 5 hours. If it's a fire and the fire can be put out but it's going to take a while, then you and the passengers are going to be sat there until it is safe to move around. However, if the fire is getting out of hand, then you will abandon ship. So the next step, if the situation was getting out of hand and there was no hope to save the ship, would be to abandon the ship. The crew would take it in turns to take the passengers to their assigned lifeboats, where they would then embark the lifeboat with maybe 7 crew members. So you would probably have like 150 passengers with 7 crew members on a lifeboat. Once all of the passengers are in their lifeboats and they have been lowered down into the ocean, all of the crew would then go and get in their assigned life rafts, which would be lowered down to the ocean, and you would just bob around until someone came and saved you. Now, obviously, that is the absolute worst case scenario and very, very unlikely that that happens, but just so you know, those are the stages of an emergency. But the announcements and the alarms that you really need to pay attention to is initial response, 1 long, because that is your signal to go to your muster station, and 7 short, 1 long, because that is when the passengers are going to start heading to their muster station and you need to be doing your job. Now, I hope that makes sense, but I'm sure it will make more sense when you actually go on board and you hear these alarms and you can put it into practice. Now, what you have to wear to a drill normally depends on the cruise lines. Some cruise lines want you to wear your uniform, so even if you are not working but there's a drill, you have to put your uniform on and wear that to drill. However, some cruise lines are just like, well, if you're not working, just go to drill in your normal clothes. However, something that all cruise lines have in common, when you go to drill, you will absolutely need to take warm clothing. It doesn't matter whether you're in the Caribbean or whether you are in Alaska. Now, the reason being is if the worst case scenario does come about and you do have to get into a lifeboat or a life raft, the Caribbean is really hot during the day, but it's really cold at night on the open water. Alaska is pretty damn cold. So in a real emergency, you are absolutely going to want to have a hoodie, a coat, a pair of tights under your trousers, a spare pair of socks, because you have to go to drill being prepared for the absolute worst case scenario. Every ship I have been on, they've all been incredibly strict on you bringing warm clothing to drill. And the reason is, if there is an emergency, of course there is going to be a little bit of panic, and when panic sets in, we stop thinking logically and you do what is habitual. It needs to be a habit that you pick up your hoodie and your coat when you go to your cabin along with your life jacket. And that's the whole point of a drill. It's drilled into you to do those things, to get your life jacket, to get any water that you have, to get your coat. That's why drills are done so often, so that if the worst case scenario happened and it was a massive panic fest, you would have everything drilled into your mind and you would just do what you do because that's what you do. And the reason that Costa Concordia went down, I mean, for many reasons, but one, the crew just had no idea what they were doing. They weren't doing regular drills and they didn't have it drilled into them. I mean, obviously there are many other reasons why that unfortunate incident happened, but one of them is that they just didn't practice often enough and it wasn't habitual. So you will do a drill every 2 weeks and you will do a passenger drill every embarkation day. Now obviously it depends what kind of cruises you're doing. You might be doing Alaska where you do 2-week cruises, or like me on Virgin you might be doing 3 5-day cruises. That means you're going to do a passenger drill every 5 days, whereas if you're in Alaska doing a 2-week cruise, you're going to do a passenger drill every 2 weeks at the beginning of every cruise. But what do you actually do in drills? The safety officer is going to come up with emergency scenarios and they're going to play out, and basically as crew you are going to have to deal with them. So maybe one week the safety officer decides to do a pretend collision with another ship, and maybe another week they have decided to do a fire in the theatre. Now this is another thing that you need to bear in mind. You will obviously have a muster station, but you will also have a secondary muster station, because let's say your muster station is the theatre. So the one long signal goes off and you go to the theatre and wait for the passengers to come. What if the fire is in the theatre? You're obviously not going to go, but you will have a secondary location and you need to know where that is. So this is why we do drills. You know, they'll have the fire in the theatre so that you can practice going to another muster station, or maybe the fire is in a main corridor and that is the route that you usually take to get to your muster station. Well, how are you going to get there now? Like, it's basically just practicing so that you are prepared for all eventualities, because you never know what the emergency is going to be. Most likely it's going to be a fire. I know that everyone, when you think of a ship, the first thing you think of is sinking or a collision or something. But there's so many electrical appliances, there's kitchens, there's lights, there's all sorts that can catch a light. And that is the most likely emergency that you are going to come across. Hopefully you don't, but a lot of the practicing will be for the eventuality of a fire. And then the last thing I'm going to mention is kind of going back to the beginning where I said you need to make sure that you actually know what you're doing, and it's a lot less embarrassing to ask all of these questions at the start of your contract than wait till like the middle of your contract. But some questions that you should ask your muster station leader or your manager or anyone in the drill: where the nearest phone is, where the nearest fire extinguisher is, what you're actually doing there, what is my role in an emergency, where is our secondary muster station if the first one should be compromised, how do I get hold of my muster station leader if I need to, how do I get hold of muster control, what is the number for the bridge, what is the number for the medical. Those are the questions that I recommend you ask as soon as possible, maybe in your first crew drill. Crew drill is the best time to ask questions about drill. It's the one time a week where all crew members are thinking about the safety of the ship. So if you do have any drill related questions, that is the time to ask. Another thing that you want to be aware of is who is usually around you. Who are the crew members that are in your vicinity? So if there's an emergency and there is someone missing, you can report that. But anyway guys, I hope you have found this video helpful. If you are going on a cruise ship, I promise this will all make a lot more sense when you are on board and you can actually put it into practice. If you are already on board, I hope this helps break it down and make more sense. But if you do have any questions regarding drill or safety on a cruise ship, please leave them down in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. But thank you so much for watching guys. I really hope you have a fantastic day and I will see you in the next video. Bye.